I'm going to test this, and it sounds like it's working. The next thing I'm going to do is welcome anyone feeling like they belong in the back row to come join us nearer the front and at the table. We hope, while we're going to open with a presentation, we are planning for this to become a conversation, and people shouldn't feel assigned to the rear echelons of the conversation. So please join us at the table. Having said that, let me first very quickly remind you that I am John Tutino. I teach history and international affairs here at Georgetown, and in my spare time, I'm a historian of Mexico and global capitalism. But I also have the great pleasure to oversee the Americas Forum, the goal of which is to bring together diverse visions and conversations and open sometimes the tough and not so fun questions in Latin America and its relations with the US. And we've been kind of quiet for a year for all kinds of complicated reasons. So the Americas Forum is sort of coming back this week. And before I introduce Penny, I am going to, and now I can't see where, there he is. I'm going to remind everyone and invite them that in a very different but equally important world, my friend, colleague Alfredo Avila will be speaking on Wednesday afternoon at 4 p.m. in ICC 462, if my mind serves me correctly, on cholera in the politics of the Americas in the 19th century, looking comparatively at the United States, Mexico, and Guatemala. So it's also a broad view. All that as preface, and welcome to you all. And it is my real pleasure to introduce Peniley Ramírez, who I have had the pleasure of getting to know in the past several years. And the information for this gives you a lot of basics, so I'm just going to do this briefly to give her the floor. The first thing I will say is that Penny is a woman of the Americas, with roots in Cuba, important time in Mexico, now based in New York. She, for a long time, as many of you will know, was the leading investigative reporter for Univision in Mexico City and won numerous awards for her work there. She recently published Los Millonarios de la Guerra, el expediente inédito de García Luna y sus socios in 2020. To my knowledge, the most detailed reconstruction of the rise of Genaro García Luna, the Mexican security establishment, and the challenges that came with his time as Minister of Public Security in the Calderón administration. Recently, as part of her role at Futuro Media in New York, she co-hosted the USA versus Garcia Luna podcast during and I think after the trial. It carried on some. She recently completed her MA in journalism at Columbia in, again, this transnational education professional sequence. So with that, I will pass the floor to Penny to present on the Garcia Luna case, Dirty Money and the War on Drugs. And I've suggested she might share her thoughts for about 45 or 50 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to conversation. So, Penny.
Yes. Testing. Okay. Hello to you all. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored, and I'm looking forward to chat with all of you and hear about your thoughts. As John said, I was born in Cuba, then I moved to Mexico. Now I'm based in New York City. I consider myself an investigative journalist specialized in transnational crime. That's what I have been doing most of my career. And for the last years, I have been, I will say, obsessed with the person that we are gonna talk about today. And in journalism, our obsessions take us from a really professional journey to a really personal journey. So I will share a lot of my journey with you all today. But I want to start with, so the proposal is we will try to solve together several questions that I brought to you today, and let's see if we can discuss about them. So I want to start not with my main character, the main character of my investigation, which is this person that John mentioned, Genaro Garcia Luna, and you will know everything about this person for when we finish, but for now, I want to start with something that we all know, and it's happening in the US, which is called the fentanyl crisis. I want to start with the present to then go to the back to understand why this person that some of you may have never heard about, it's important and why he matters. So I want to start with this crisis. And I want to start telling you a story that is not well known in the US and happened in 1999 in Chimayo, New Mexico. In that moment, the DEA did a raid in Chimayo, New Mexico. More than 100 people were arrested, and they were dismantling a local gang that was bringing drugs, mainly from Mexico and Colombia. And they did that, and after the announcement, you will remember this proud announcements that go on TV and say, oh, we dismantled this, and now there is not gonna be problems anymore. Well, right now, that part of this country, New Mexico, is the place in the US where you have more people dying by overdoses, mostly from fentanyl in the entire country. So what is the fentanyl? I will start by asking you to participate with me. A recent report from the DEA that was released just a couple of weeks ago contained one phrase that really impacted me, and is how many people can die by overdoses with 1 gram of fentanyl. So just to give you an example, if you go to the cafeteria, I just went to the cafeteria now, and you will put some sugar in your coffee, that's 1 gram about. So with that of fentanyl, how many people do you think that can be killed? Oh, only mistake, only mistakes accepted. 10,000? 100,000? 10? Wow. 5,000? No, less? Okay. 500 people can die just with 1 gram. So with what is in 1 gram, the amount of sugar that you will put in a coffee, 500 people can be killed. And we have an overdoses problem in the US. We know this, more than 107,000 people have died from overdoses between 2021 and 2022. And 7 of each 10 of them died just by fentanyl. But we don't have that amount of people dying just with 1 gram. So that means that even if the crisis is really, really bad, something it's really working, right? If you think and you switch to the perspective of the business. So if you go today, I was in Sinaloa 3 years ago, and I interviewed a guy that they called it los cocineros, the cookers. And I asked them about this crisis. And he said, well, some people died, but we have a lot of clients. And I was like, what do you do with those dead? Oh, they said, there is no problem. We are remasterizing the mix. We are improving the mix, so our clients will be happy in the US. And the way that they were improving or remasterizing the mix was to add in back heroin and mix it with the fentanyl. And that brought a lot of joy to other of my sources in Sinaloa. So after interviewing this guy, I went to a previous source that I interviewed 2 years before, also in Sinaloa. And the moment when I interviewed him in 2017, he was so sad because nobody else wants heroin anymore. We don't have enough clients, all this weed being now legal in the US is killing our business. We're starving here in the mountains of Sinaloa. But then when I did the fentanyl investigation, he was so happy that the business was back. And now we have all these things that we are putting in place so we can mix to improve the fentanyl. So what I'm starting with all this story that is current to tell you that even if we have this huge and really bad crisis in the US, we also have a great business in both sides of the border with a lot of people in Mexico living from this business because some of them, and this is part of a more complex conversation, they have really not other many options to survive. And at the same time, you have all these drugs, especially now fentanyl, coming into the US, and of course there's a lot of people dying, and that's horrible, but at the same time you have more and more people surviving because the mix is remasterized. So let's talk about these numbers before we move on. And it is, in 2020, according to CBP, Custom and Borders Protection, in the border they seized, it was 2.4 tons of fentanyl. That was 2022. And then in 2020, I'm sorry. And then in 2022, they moved from 2 tons to 7 tons. And just in the 2 first months of this year, they moved from 7 tons in 12 months last year to 6 tons just January and February of this year. And I love a quote in that report that just came out too, saying that, okay, we can say, of course, that there is more seizures because, oh, our custom and border agents are doing so well and now they are getting everything. But guess what? If you go back to Sinaloa, my sources are still happy because they are still sending a lot of merchandise. So if you go to the report of CBP, and all of this is public reports, so it's worth reading and digging in them because they are fascinating. And what they say is, this is just a tiny part of what's really happening. And we know this by public hearings in the Senate in the last 2 to 3 years. They have been saying and saying, people that have been invited to the Senate have been saying, we only catch about 1% to 2% to 5% of what's really happening. So if you wanna go from the numbers to the stories, we have to understand why it's so important that we understand the fentanyl crisis today and we understand the roots of this crisis. And I want to take you to a third report, and then I will try to prevent myself from not mentioning more reports, which is the request that the DEA made for Congress just 2 weeks ago. So the DEA, as you know, all the institutions, public institutions in the US, they're doing the request for a new budget for the upcoming 2024 fiscal year. And they said, oh, we need more money because we need to prevent the drugs to come to the US. Basically what they have been saying forever, because that's their role. But then you have the first paragraph of what's the most important thing that they will do with the money. And they will do with the money, they will prevent the drugs to come by stopping two organizations that they call the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco Nueva Generación Cartel. So this is paragraph 1 of the petition of budget of I can share with you through John if you want some of these reports, but they're easy to find online. And I want to focus today not that much in the Jalisco Nueva Generación Cartel, even if it's, as an organization, it's also fascinating, but in the Sinaloa Cartel. And now I want to bring to the table somebody that maybe you all know and you have heard about, and is this sort of a movie media character that barely could speak in reality, that is called Joaquin Guzman Loera. So any of you know who is Joaquin Guzman Loera? Okay, so we have this idea that we in the media are partly responsible for, that this guy was sort of a Robin Hood, modern Robin Hood that was born in poverty in the mountains of Sinaloa, and he made himself as this idea, really American idea of the self-made man, and he made it to the big drug lord in the Sinaloa cartel. And his specialty within the cartel was specifically two things. One thing, he got really good by building tunnels. Then he used them in the late 80s for moving drugs behind behind the border. And then he used it for himself to escape a prison in 2015. But this person, even if the media, the media, have reported him as this mastermind of the Sinaloa cartel, is just one player in an organization that works more as a franchise, let's say, horizontal organization, and less as a triangular, typical cartel if we go back to the economic literature. So why this person matters and why he doesn't matter that much in reality? So he matters, of course, because he's the way that we all have in America right now to understand that, yes, it is a cartel. Yes, they are bringing a lot of tons of cocaine and now to fentanyl to the United States. And yes, they have some leadership, charismatic leadership that are basically making things and taking care of all the logistics. But if you go to Sinaloa and you interview them, you will understand that the logic behind the daily logistics of the cartel are more similar to what we will see in a modern, global, transnational organization, even in the legal business. And as John was saying, I graduated last year with a Master of Arts in Business and Economics Journalism at Columbia. And I remember when I was taking my classes and we were receiving guests from Wall Street, they were saying, we did this, this, this. And I said, oh, like my sources in Sinaloa. Oh, they are doing that too. So if we move from the Robin Hood idea to how this complex organization works as a transnational global enterprise, we could see why it's important that they have that they tackle, let's say, different tasks. So if we then go back to the idea of this Chapo Guzman drug lord, that he's like a micromanager of crime, that's not how it is in reality, because you will have, at least in the Sinaloa cartel, you will have several bosses, let's call it like that will tackle different things. So El Chapo was not the one tackle the most important thing that I will talk about today, which is corruption. But he was really well known, again, because of the media. And then he was a huge goal for the bilateral relations, Mexico-US. So in 2019, El Chapo was extradited to the United States after building his legend, escaping twice from high security prisons in Mexico. And it was by then it was books about him, movies about him, television series about him, all that kind of stuff. So I was working as a correspondent, investigative correspondent for Univision, as John also mentioned, and I was in charge of covering this guy, the trial. And all of a sudden, in the middle of El Chapo's trial, you will see in those federal trials in the US that you have like all the elements that the prosecution needs to build their case. And they will bring some elements that are not central to the case, but it could be key for other investigations. So in November of 2018, another person was mentioned in El Chapo's trial. And this person was mentioned by another let's say, drug lord or boss in the Sinaloa cartel, who was specifically asked to tackle two things: to manage the airport of Mexico City. So this was the person in charge of huge things, which is all the drugs are gonna come mainly from the cocaine mainly from Colombia, and you will get it, and then you will distribute it, and then you will send it to the United States. So the Mexico City airport was this big hub of the drug. I love that the prosecution recently in New York, one prosecutor called it the FedEx of cocaine. So if we think that this is the kind of the headquarters of the FedEx of cocaine, you will imagine that this person that will be heading this operation will have a lot of information, Q information. So this guy, who is called Rey Zambada, we call it also the king because we have all these funny names in the narco industry. So this El Rey, or the king, in the middle of El Chapo's trial mentioned this other guy called Genaro Garcia Luna. And this is the guy I have been obsessed with for a long, long time. So let's try to imagine in our minds another moment in Genaro Garcia Luna's life. So in 2018, Genaro Garcia Luna is mentioned in El Chapo's trial, and this person, El Rey Zambada, says, oh, the question was, how you managed to operate as the FedEx of cocaine in this huge hub, Mexico City airport? And he said, oh, no problem, we had help from the federal police. And now we know more details. And what was that help? Oh, no problem. The drug will come in the plane from Colombia. The patrols from the federal police will come to the airplane. They will unload the cocaine. They will move the cocaine inside the airport in the patrol, so nobody, of course, will see it. That's police logistics. And then they will deliver it to the cartel. So clean and easy operation, right? Better than a movie. And the next question was, but how you managed to do that? And he said, oh, because we have a really important person that we were bribing, and that person was this guy, Genaro Garcia Luna. So let's talk about Genaro Garcia Luna. So he was born in 1968 in a working class family in Mexico City. He wanted to be a soccer player, but he failed as a soccer player. So he tried to work in a soccer club in Mexico City that we don't like, my husband and I, so we are okay that they didn't accept him. This is called El America. But we are rooting for Pumas of the National University. So, but he didn't make it. So then he tried to become an engineer, and he became an engineer. And then in the late 1980s in Mexico City, a DEA agent was killed. Then his name was Quique Camarena. Maybe you know this story too. And then a lot of things happened after that killing, including that all of a sudden Mexico realizes that they have a political police that was really corrupt. Or surprise, like right now they just discovered that people disappeared in Tamaulipas just after 4 Americans are kidnapped there. So in that moment, they dismantled this federal police that existed and security forces. We will call it in Spanish the DFS, and they created a new organization. So the pitch for the new organization was that, oh, now we are tackling corruption. We are bringing new blood, new faces, the modern Mexican police. And this person that failed as a soccer player and then failed as intend to be an engineer said, well, let's try the police. And he became a low-ranking spy in the late 1980s. He's still really into that kind of things. He loves a lot of crazy things that I don't get, like he loves American things, he loves Donna Summer, and he loves to dance American music, and he's obsessed with CSI and with James Bond. He even organized a birthday party when he turned 50 years old with James Bond, so you will get the invitation, and that's funny now because this invitation is now part of the exhibits of a federal trial, and you get the invitation saying, oh, you are invited, you can tell anybody. So this quite a unique character, all of a sudden becomes first a low-ranking director, then he becomes the head of the equivalent, the Mexican equivalent to the federal or investigation agencies. And then in 2006, he becomes the head of the Mexican equivalent to the DHS, something like that. It's not specifically because it's not the same structure, but it had a lot of power. He was in charge of the federal prison system. He was in charge of the federal police. He was also in charge with federal investigations regarding, and he had a bunker that everybody loved. It was like a movie, CSI bunker. Even it's beautiful if you search for that online, because they did a trailer for the bunker, and the trailer is copied. It's almost plagiarism. It's copied from the trailer of the second season of CSI Las Vegas, which also I'm a fan. That's why I recognize that. So this person with all this power was kind of really bettered by the US in too many ways. So part of what the people advocating for him, and I will explain now why people are advocating for him, have said publicly is, and we have some pictures that I can share with you if you want, of, for example, this guy, Genaro Garcia Luna, meeting in 2008 with John McCain when he was the presidential candidate and US Senator, the Republican senator. He also met with Eric Holder when he was the US attorney. They met several times. I have in my notes 2009, 2011, 2012. Then he was meeting, of course, with Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. Because remember, she is Secretary of State, and he is the head of the Mexican equivalent to the DHS. So if you are having this level of relationship with Mexico because you want to stop the drugs from coming to the US, you will meet with their guy, and he was their guy. It's not like you have a lot of options. That's also true. It's important to put that in context. But anyway, he was better to meet with Hillary, and they met in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. And then he met with Barack Obama when he was US president in 2009. And then in 2012, he was about to leave office because the government term was ending, and he received an award from the CIA. David Petraeus, who was in that moment the head of the CIA, gave him an award. And I put in my notes the wording of the award because it's so beautiful. It says, so this is CIA, head of the CIA, 2012. And it says, to Genaro Garcia Luna, in appreciation for your friendship, collaboration, and support. And now we know that in the moment when he received this award in 2012, he had been working for El Chapo for 11 years as his main guy within the Mexican government. So what happened in that moment was Garcia Luna, a mastermind, triple agent. So this CSI fan, James Bond, frustrated soccer player, managed to work at the same time since 2001 for the Mexican government, being the head of the super important office, for El Chapo Guzman being the person who will allow the FedEx of cocaine to operate in a Mexican City airport, among a lot of other things. And he was also working with really close to the US organizations. And why it was important that, why he was in that position of power, and why it was important that award that he was receiving from the CIA in 2012. Because the relationship, the bilateral relations between Mexico and the US turned into a new whole level during the crisis with the drugs coming into the US, a lot of arms going into Mexico and a lot of violence in Mexico that remains until today, and a lot of overdoses, death in the US that also, as I said at the beginning, remains until today. So it is true that Garcia Luna was not handpicked by the US. It was handpicked by the Mexican governments, in plural, that appointed him into a really important positions. But it's also true that he was the one operating a huge effort, and I will say bilateral effort, to prevent the situation to become as bad as it has become until today. And I want to touch on another thing that is also widely reported, and was called back in the day the Merida Initiative. So when the situation was getting bad, let's say, and there is another context, a lot of my sources in the cartel, they have been saying that, especially for New York, after the 9/11, they found that the market was asking for more drugs. A lot of people were in trauma, they were asking and asking for more material. And again, if we go back, if we get out of the good cop, bad cops, and cops versus narcos narrative, and we try to understand that this is a global enterprise taking advantage of the market, and you have a lot of people in trauma, and you have a lot of demand, what would you do? You will try to supply the demand, right? Exactly what's happening right now. Or you will improve your product, as my sources are doing now with the fentanyl and the heroin mix in Sinaloa. So in that moment, you have El Chapo Guzman escaping from the prison in 2001. Then you have a new division of power within the cartel, and you have El Rey Zambada, based in Mexico City, tackling he calls it the relationships with government. Again, that will be something that a formal legal organization will have. They will have a press officer, as the cartels have. They will have a PR officer. They will have a person who manages the relationship with the government. Well, all of this also happens in this illegal organization, which is way more complex than the stereotype that we have been thinking and reporting from the press. And this is a big criticism about the way that we, the press, have been presenting the stories. So this person who was dealing with the press, dealing with the government, was testifying and telling all the details of the things that they were doing. And at the same time, it was so important to them that Garcia Luna was in a position of power. And they will, of course, they will want him to success. If you have a good source or a good contact, and this person is in a position of power, you will try that person to still be in that position of power. And then something happened in 2006, and this, all of this that I will tell now, it's according to core records, and I will explain that later why core records. But according to these core records that are based and also publicly available in New York, you will have a moment in 2006, 2007, when the different organizations that were based in Mexico, some of them more in the Gulf of Mexico, they were called Cartel del Golfo, then also Los Zetas. You will have the more traditional organizations like the Sinaloa cartel itself. And you will have more and more demand, so you will start having, and we had it, we saw in Mexico, an increase of the violence, an increase of the problems even within the organization. Why is this important? Because if you have a person in power that serves to you, and you need assistance from that person, you will try, as you are paying more and more, to have more brother assistance. So it's like, oh, you go to them, back to them, and say, okay, I'm paying you $10. And you are, with the $10, you are giving me the patrols that we just said, so to move the cocaine. But if I give you 15, what else you can do for me? Oh, well, I can do, if you don't want to have a class with Dion, I can just put it with another professor. Or if you don't want the other professor and you want a class with Dion, I will say, okay, perfect, you will have the class with Dion. So you can provide more services. This other services was, for example, I don't like this commander that you're putting in this city because I don't have an agreement with him. Could you please put the other commander that I like? Oh, no problem, I can do that for you. Oh, I need to fight against these other guys who are my rivals, but I can get inside because they have all the local police. So how I get in? Oh, no problem, because I'm the federal police. So I can come in with my federal police forces and said, get out, take out all the local police, I'm in charge now. And I say, oh, but how I make sure that you will really do all the things that you need. Oh, no worries. I have some extra uniforms. Do you want to use them? So you can just come with us. I can give you some extras IDs. So you join us, and you can see that we're providing the service that we agreed. All of this seems like out of a movie, right? Well, all of this is out of public records that you can check. So as you can see, the assistance of this person becomes, let's say, more and more like a package. You can get more for your combo. Now you have a French fries, and you have a Coke, and you have more stuff. So this guy becomes more and more important. And at some point, and this again goes back to the records, this guy is in the middle of two organizations. One of them is paying to him. The other one is paying less or not paying. It depends on the source. And then you need to justify that you're going there and getting there. So according to the New York prosecution, they just said, oh, what about if we say that we are in a war on drugs? Now, if you are in war, we can just go there and fight the war. So if you add more dollars to your combo, then you can have all the militaries, and you can have all the police into the place, whatever place you like. You don't spend too much money from your own sicarios or whatever. I will send the police, and they will have public funds. So if you go back to the money, it's like now the government is spending government's money to move things, to move people around, to buy ammunition and weapons for these people, and to fight for the people that the other ones don't like. So in the middle of that, there were a lot of good reasons to go against these people, because when I say these people, I'm referring specifically to the Zetas, and the Zetas was a really, really violent organization that was involved in a lot of extortion to local population. So it was not a bad idea to go against Los Zetas, even legally. So what is it true? If they did it just because it was a good idea, which is also true, or they did it because they were providing a service. We go back to the combo, right? So in the middle of all of this, the US and Mexico starts a negotiation. And this negotiation then is approved by the Congress, then is, it's called the Merida Initiative. And for the last years, between fiscal year 2008 and fiscal year 2021, the US sent to Mexico, how much money do you think? Let's do another poll. I will say, just to guide you, it could be, it's more than $1 million. It's less than 5 billion. So your bets. 3 billions. No? Okay, 3.3 billions. Perfect, you can get a candy at the end. 3.3 billions from fiscal year 2008 to fiscal year 2021. And so if you are sending to another country $3 billion or $3.3 billion, again, like with the narcos, you want something in exchange. So but Mexico too has the right to say, okay, we are doing this together, so you are also giving me something, right? So why they agreed, and this is again back to my notes. They agreed two things. The US part agreed that they will prevent the weapons to go to Mexico, and they will tackle that, and they will try to tackle the demand of drugs. Do you think they achieved what they tried to do it? Okay, in Mexico, the big commitment was just one, to tackle the corruption. Do you think they did it? So especially if the head of the organization, most important organization that will tackle this is in the payroll of El Chapo. We know this. He has been in the payroll by then for 6 or 7 years. So Mexico receives all this money, and again, let's go back to our guy and the things that he loves. So what do you think he did with the money, part of the money? Well, he produced a TV series, like CSI style, And you can see one helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter donated by the United States in the trailer of the series. He has spent $10 million in the series. Is not all from the money from the US, of course, but partly. He also did buy a lot of equipment, but some of that equipment was lost. And he also arrested some people that, according again to public records, were basically enemies of the people he was serving. That doesn't mean, and it's important that I put this in context, that doesn't mean that Mexico was not doing anything at all. Mexico was arresting people in a strategy that was also criticized because basically they were arresting high-ranking people, but then if you arrest the high-ranking people, what happens with the rest of the people in the system? They will fight for the power. So it was more violence and more violence. So that was criticized, but that doesn't mean that they were not doing anything at all. In the case of the witnesses and sources that I have against Garcia Luna, they said that they needed to pretend that they were doing something. So they were doing something against the rivals. So perfect, you have your combo, you have your services, and then I have a cool picture in the paper saying I'm the best police officer in Mexico. And also Garcia Luna was tackling this really well. In 2008, a glamorous article was published by the New York Times calling Garcia Luna the fixer. And he said that this is the guy that is saving Mexico. He is the one that is tackling the cartels and all of that. We know that, well, he was doing that, but at the same time, he was busy, let's say. So fast forward, in 2012, the Felipe Calderón's administration finishes, so he had not a job anymore. So he decided to have a new career path. And the career path was not in Mexico, but again, related to the US. So he moved to Miami, and after serving most of his life as a public servant with middle-class salary, he moves to a $3 million house in Miami, which a yacht. I don't know how to pronounce yacht, I'm sorry. But he also had some, let's say, some Mustangs parked in the house. He had some cool stuff like Harley Davidson. He also really loved the motorcycles. And the narcos knew this, so for the birthday, they will just give him a motorcycle, like a Harley, just to keep things going. So he moved to Miami. He obtained an O visa. That means they're really people, really talented, valued by the United States. And he was living in Miami from 2012 to 2018 when he was mentioned in El Chapo's trial. And then he moved briefly to Texas, and he was arrested in Texas in 2019. How he managed to live in Miami for all those years? Basically, well, according to the accusations, he was also working for the cartel. He was also receiving more money from the Mexico's government. Right now, there is an ongoing civil lawsuit in Miami, claiming that he stole $700 million from the Mexican government. Part of that money that was going from Mexico, from the US to Mexico, and he did it through a chain of more than 80 companies that were based mainly in Florida, also in Panama, Luxembourg, Taiwan, Colombia, Barbados. So they will, for example, in 2011, there was a horrible massacre in Villas de Salvarcar, Juarez. 16 teenagers were killed while they were celebrating a birthday. And a group of hitmen just came and shot him to death. A few days after that, after a scandal in the country, etc., the Mexican president, Felipe Calderón, went to Juarez. And of course, Garcia Luna was there too. And after that, they said, now we are going to take care of the situation, and we will bring the police, and we will put all these cameras. So part of the cameras that they brought was to a contract to the partners of Garcia Luna, who were, the owners of the $3 million house that he had in Miami. So he said that the house didn't belong to him, but let's talk about friendship. He moved to the house. After he came to the US, he moved straight to a $3 million house next to the beach in Miami, and then he doesn't pay any rent. He lives there for 4 years, paid rent-free. And then when they sell the house in 2016, he received the money from the house in his bank account. But then when they asked him, they say, I was not the owner of the house. I just lived there rent-free, and then I just got the money when they sold the house, but I have good friends. And I love joking, saying, well, I would love to have just one of those friends. But then, fast forward, and that's the final part of what I want to share with you today before we chat more, is during all these years, the problem was not solved, of course. He was living as a millionaire here. There were a lot of attempts to investigate him. I know that the attempts started in the Mexican government really early. I think the first one was 2002, so he was under different kinds of investigations over the years. The Mexican president has said that he heard about some rumors about his possible ties to the cartels, but nothing was confirmed. We know that also the US Embassy knew about some rumors too, but nothing was confirmed. And according to the New York prosecution, because when he was arrested in Texas was because he was indicted in New York, it was really, really hard, even if they had a lot of information about him, it was really hard to really get him. Basically, according to the prosecution, because the guy was really smart, and because a lot of people that could know were dead. Some of them as accidents, some of them were just quiet. So for the last month and a half, since mid-January, I spent 6 weeks sitting in a federal courthouse in New York covering his trial. Genaro Garcia Luna on February 21st was found guilty on 5 charges of basically saying that he was a triple agent working for a double agent, because they will mention, of course, the CIA award and all of that. But basically that brings us back to the beginning of my talk, which is, okay, so now what? El Chapo Guzman is in jail, facing life in prison. Garcia Luna is in jail, guilty on all charges. And what just happened is, like, in January of this year, Joe Biden went to Mexico City, met there with Justin Trudeau and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and they said, we are getting rid of the Merida Initiative because it was not good enough, so now we're doing a new thing that is called the Bicentennial Framework. And I have in my notes, and that's the final part, the goals of the Bicentennial Framework. So, first goal, reduce the demand. We haven't heard about that before, right? Second, reduce the impunity and corruption in Mexico. Third goal, prevent the transborder crime, so reduce the trafficking of weapons from the US to Mexico. And then pursue criminal networks, disrupt illicit financiers. In my case, in the case of my investigation, now the case, of course, is bigger, but in the last 10 years I have been I managed to trace up to $400 million. Now the case is bigger, is about 750 million. So I couldn't find all the money, but it was a lot anyway, and I traced 83 companies. So if you take the complexity of just this one case, you can see that the challenge that both countries have to prevent the drugs to come, to prevent the weapons to go to Mexico, and to prevent the impunity to continue, and to reduce the demand here, to reduce the violence there. It goes through a lot of channels, but one important one that I want, and I hope I can leave you with this one idea, is how we tackle the people that we trust, how we vet the people that are in charge of power, and how we, from the press, because I'm a journalist, so I always have this reflection from the press, how we explain better the complexity of a global enterprise that doesn't work in the stereotype way that we see it in the TV series, and how we go beyond this narrative of black and white, one side and the other side. That doesn't mean, and I was talking to John before, that the government is not monolithic, and we saw that during the trial of Garcia Luna. We saw really brave people in the police forces that were saying what they were witnessing regarding Garcia Luna. Few of them are alive. Some of them came to New York to give testimony. And we also know that there are not single cases. As John said, after I published my book, I co-host a podcast about Garcia Luna, mainly about Garcia Luna, but we also mentioned another case of corruption that was poorly managed by the DEA in Haiti in recent years. And you have some other examples of specific cases, but the broader conclusion is, even if you have all the complexity of a global illegal enterprise, and you have a lot of people with good efforts to tackle, the reality is that it's been almost 20 years, and they now have a new framework, and basically they are pursuing the same thing. And that's, for me, that's the best proof that they haven't achieved anything that they have pursued so far, or at least like really achieved it. So I know that most of you are interested in bilateral relationships and the way that different governments interact. And I must say, my experience as a journalist, and this is the final idea, I think that we need to think the way that these organizations work, and those is transnational. Everything is transnational. I could have not investigated Garcia Luna just with the databases I had from Mexico. I will say 60% of my investigation, even when I was based in Mexico City, was in Miami, because that's where the money went. So the money, as I said, went from Washington after the Congress approved it to Mexico, and then came back to the US via Miami. And we know that Miami is becoming what it's becoming, also because you have a lot of money, not just from Mexico, from Venezuela, from Colombia, and from other places. So I think that if we think about the drawdown works and the dirty money in the broader perspective, we need to think how to tackle transnational crime and how the relationship between different countries should emphasize more, not just the interchange of information, but to really the complexity of transnational networks that operate really well, that are really well integrated, and think about them more from the enterprise, global enterprise analysis, and less like, oh, poor guy that was born in poverty in the mountains of Sinaloa. So thank you so much.
Here we go. Thank you so much, Penny. Both the complexity, but how do I say, to mix such complexity, but well, I want to say the kind of personal detail, which in a way makes the story engageable in ways. So I appreciate that a lot. I want to open this to a wider conversation. I don't want to start the question because I get a chance to talk with Penny in a variety of contexts. I want to let other people take the lead. And what I do want to say is we've got a couple of microphones and one here. And if people will pass around the microphone or get to the microphone, because we're recording this. It will end up available on the Americas Institute website as a program you can use, enjoy whenever and wherever. So I want to ask if you would please get to one of the microphones, get the green light on, and if you would introduce yourself, it's good to know who's in the conversation, briefly. And raise whatever. So please, let us open the conversation. So we got several questions here. Let's move the microphone. Sure. First person who gets the microphone gets the first question.
So scary, and to see if the technology works. But first of all, thank you so much for coming here. Both your book and your podcast me han acompañado in all of my research, and hearing you, I'm almost missing the caballito of tequila to start it. So thank you so much for bringing the humanity and the humor to such a, I think, frustrating and complex case, such as a García Luna one. If you don't mind, I have two questions. One is more on the expertise and the big ideas, and the other one is in the personal one,
Okay.
and the personal note. Like, looking at this case and with the evidence, I didn't have my hopes high. However, I do believe that it was a missed opportunity for mutual accountability. We're so used for the narrative of like, of course, Mexican government is corrupt, and we are corrupt, and we're messed up in all types of ways. But I think there is collaboration, and there was collusion from the U.S. government, and we have seen also so many cases recently from DEA agents in the U.S. operating in Mexico, or the Haiti case that just also shows that the U.S. we can flip the tortilla on them from time to time. So clearly, the two governments are not going to do anything. So what do you believe is the role of civil society or journalism, such as yourself, to change the narrative that this is not only a Mexican problem, but this is a problem that expands from both governments? And then the other question, recognizing that you're not only an expert, but also you're a person, and as you have characterized it, it has been your obsession. How do you take care of yourself? And how do you, I think like, as somebody who works on this, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Yana Paz Garcia. I just graduated with my MA in conflict resolution, and I work at Brookings on transnational organized crime groups. How do you handle this, and how do you preserve yourself in a case that is, in so many cases, are all consuming and so frustrating?
Okay. If I got the first question right, is how we put some pressure in both governments. Well, I think that and that's what I say is not. I think, for example, I will start with an example. The DA has these sensitive information units, which are some units that they had from late 1990s, if I'm right, to go to these other countries and have a group of people that they trust and they vet and they trained, and they can trust with sensitive information. So that's one of the ways that the DEA have been dealing with the fact that it is true, there is a lot of corruption in our countries, and when you interview current officers of the US or former officers in the US, almost all of them will tell you, well, that was full of rats, basically. I needed to work with somebody, and that was the only people available, and if I don't trust the people with the power in those countries. And that's also true. So how you manage around that? And I will say that the lack of cases, we did a database for the podcast. I didn't do it for the book, but for the podcast, we did a database of how many corrupt officials from the DEA have been under investigation or under prosecution in the last years. And it was really tiny. I think it was 14 in 20 years. So my question is, it is because there is enough investigation? It is because there are just not many? Or it is because we from the press haven't put a lot of attention to more cases? So I think that there is a myth in Latin America that is like, if the Americans are here, things are less corrupt. It is because we have this idea of the American exceptionalism, even in Latin America, as we have it here in the US. So tackling the fact that there are also a possibility of corruption, even if there are agents. We saw this story about Nick Palmieri, the former head of the DEA in Mexico, that was published just by the investigation by Key Hamilton from Vice. And the guy was basically using DEA's money to pay for his birthday party, or part of his birthday party. So I think that from my perspective, from the press, is of course we always need more journalism. I have a friend who says before any attacks, more journalism. From the civil society, I will say it's important that we think about how to hold accountable the U.S. from the U.S., not just from our countries. Because it is also true that we have serious threats from democracy in our countries. I think that the situation that we have in Mexico right now is really special. And sometimes you will have a few organizations that do investigative journalism independently, and most of them are funded by big foundations from the US. That's also a reality. So you don't have a lot of room to investigate certain things. It doesn't mean that they are censoring you, but there is like an unwritten rule about it. But we have a lot of possibilities in the US to really try to look inwards too and try to understand. So I will leave it there because I think it's important to take more questions. But about taking care of myself, well, I do therapy. I do trauma therapy weekly, as many of us. I try to speak publicly about health issues because I think mental health issues because I think it's important to openly talk about it. I do other things like dance and meditate, and I dance a lot. Especially during the trial, I was dancing in the middle of the night before attending the trial because I really need it. I'm Cuban, so dancing is a big part of my life. But also I have a net of support from colleagues and my family because it's always a challenge. I have been dreaming with García Luna. my husband says that García Luna is my most stable relationship. And that gives you an idea of how embedded I am been with this story. But at the same time, something that really helped me was that the day he was declared guilty, I was seated next to Anabel Hernandez, who was another Mexican journalist that had been investigating García Luna for a long time, and she was forced to leave Mexico because of him, and she started crying in the moment when we heard that he was declared guilty. And then I started crying too. And I was like, this is not professional. I shouldn't be doing this because I'm just a journalist. But at the same time, you can't just separate here. But after 5 minutes, I was like back on the field doing my thing. So I think that this idea of that we are impartial and we don't feel about it, it's not true because this story involves a lot of drama from a lot of people that we know, that we have been covering for a long time. Some of my sources from the victims' side that have lost relatives, and I needed to call them and give them the news, and that was a really emotional moment. But I do think, and that's why I love the podcast, because I have been so serious all my career. And in the podcast, you had the tequila, and we drink tequila in the podcast. So we have the tequila, and we can get a really more personal. And I think that also helps to understand that we journalists also make mistakes, and we are human beings. And we sometimes get too attached to our stories. But at the same time, that doesn't prevent us from being professionals with the things that we do. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
There we go. Hello, my name is Ernesto Truqui. From
Hola.
Mexico.
Hola, nice.
Hola. I currently work at McClarty Associates. And my question, I guess it's more a comment than a question, but I would like to get your reaction to it.
Okay.
And I'll preface it by saying that this is not a defense of García Luna, and I followed the trial, probably not as closely as you did, but I was aware of what was going on daily, and it became evidently clear to me that García Luna became or is wealthy far beyond what his salary could justify, or what we could justify from the public record and from what he's earned and what he could have received legally. That's evidently clear to me. What I remain unconvinced of isn't, I'm sure that he could have collaborated with cartels. Perhaps he did. I remain unconvinced by the evidence that was presented in court, simply because, as you know, it was testimony from people that have already been tried and convicted in the U.S. and that are cooperating with the U.S. authorities. So, I mean, I'm not casting a doubt that he did this. It's just, I don't think that the evidence was as strong as it could have been. And as somebody that has spent years researching this, do you think that that evidence exists out there? Or did he do a good job at hiding it?
Well, there is some reaction I had to this. The moment when we started covering the trial, they said that the trial will last for more than 8 weeks. And all of a sudden, after 5 weeks, they said, we're done. We're gonna rest our case. It was I remember, it was a Wednesday. We were not going back to court on Thursday, and not on Friday, and they say they will rest on Monday. And I remember that we recorded a debrief from me that didn't make it to the podcast. And I was like really frustrated, saying, it is not possible. And it was like not a humble moment, because it's not possible that my investigation is stronger than this case. And I was really pissed off in that moment, because the prosecution told us for years that they have more than 1 million pages of documents, that they have all of these kinds of evidence. And then from the very first moment when we started covering the jury selection, they said this case is based mainly in testimonies. That said, it is also true, and I have been trying to explain this, that it is legal in the US to convict a person just with one testimony. And it is also true that the defense was really successful in presenting this idea of there is no good evidence in the case, there is only testimonies from narcos. But first, it was not just testimonies from narcos. We had 9 narcos, but we also had the former ambassador to Mexico from the US that said that they didn't cooperate that much with the US, but he also said we didn't have like a suspicions of him like to immediately go after him. But you had all the things, and I think I had this feeling, the same feeling that you have most of the trial, until the last moment of the closing arguments. And during the closing arguments, Sarita Comatiredi, the lead of the prosecution, explained how all the elements that they presented for 5 weeks and were embedded into the narrative that they were trying to. And I think she was convincing, because he was declared guilty on all charges. Basically, I will say from my experience, I think that the prosecution could have done a really better job in presenting their case. I think that they kind of knew that there is a 98% of conviction in trials in the US that includes a jury. I think that they were just that this is what we need to convince them. Of course, the trial was not for us, not for the Mexican people, and that's really sad, because the victims needed really, really more. The stronger part, and you will see it if you read my book, I dedicate 4 chapters of my book to all the Miami thing. And the Judge Brian Cogan prevented any of that to be part of the trial. But I think he had a good reason, and it's that the prosecutor didn't do a good job in connecting that. It is really clear to me that there is a lot of corruption around Garcia Luna and from Garcia Luna, and he benefited from that. But the trace of the money regarding the Sinaloa cartel was not clear in the documents trace as it was the rest of the money. That doesn't mean that I feel or I think that he didn't do it, because I have other sources who corroborate the same things that the testimonies said during the trial. What I think is that the prosecution didn't do a good job by convincing us beyond the jury. But it's also true that their job is to convince the jury, not us. So I will say that's part of a broader criticism about the US judicial system and the overuse of cooperating witnesses. And I think that's a good topic for a lot of other analysis regarding how the prosecution had been basically having no problem doing agreements with anybody to achieve their prosecution rate. Let's call it like that.
I want to jump in for one thing.
Okay.
And those who've been in my classes have heard me say this before. The case is powerful. Read the book. Don't skim it. Read it, word for word. And I will tell you, doubts really fade. Yeah, please, we need to move the microphone too.
No? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. This was fascinating. I'm Ari Katsovich. I'm a visiting professor from Israel, originally from Latin America. And 2 years ago, I published a book on peaceful borders and illicit transnational flows,
Oh, wow.
more from an international relations perspective. So this is fascinating. Two very quick questions. One is regarding the role of the Mexican government, as it was mentioned, whether Felipe Calderón or others, or whether this is a unique case of somebody who raised to this position. And the second question, since this is Georgetown, and thinking about pattern, social scientist, you are a journalist, what do you learn from this case? Is this a unique case in terms of policy recommendations?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think the role of the Mexican government was the most revealing part for me from the trial. And I'm also a columnist, and one of the I decided to write a series of columns regarding the trial. One of them, I call it the narco state. And it was really hard to see how broadly corrupt and how deep embedded is the narco in the Mexican state. Basically, from the perspective, because I had experience covering narcotraffic, so I knew relatively well the Colombian case. And in that case from Colombia, they really wanted to make it to the Congress. And we have the Escobar's case as a better example. But in this case, I always had this idea that, they don't need the political power. They are not trying to get into it. We don't have, until now, at least that I know, a narco law from Mexico that is a member of a Congress, for example. But then I realized that they didn't need that, because they did a really good job, if we can use that expression for narcos, embedding in the local power to really solve one of the questions, one of the things that I mentioned before, which is the logistics of the day-to-day. And I have, even if I have been covering narcos for a long time, I like to portray myself as a journalist that always asks for the money question. So when I was assigned to go to find a laboratory in the middle of nowhere in Sinaloa, my questions were, and what's the cost of this? What's your profit? And then maybe that's why I came to Colombia to do that kind of master. And what's the cost of the delivering, etc. So if we think from the money perspective, it is really useful for them to pay low bribes. Because if you are paying a low-ranking person, you don't need to spend a lot of money, actually, and you will get the things that you need, basically free pass. But the important thing with Garcia Luna is that at the same time that he was rose into power, he was also pitching as something that the U.S. also wanted, that was having a federal police in Mexico. And having a federal police with more power, more professional, which is also true that they were more professional, less corrupt, with more controls, all of that, will also help to, let's say, up the level of the deals, because you will have a police that will have control. That was not solved in Mexico with Garcia Luna's fall, because basically we don't have now a person from the civil side so powerful as him, but we have the militaries with all the power, even more power that the Garcia Luna had. And we have several cases, documented cases of really corrupt people in the military. So it is a unique case. sadly, no. And I think it's because something important about Garcia Luna's story is that one of the things that he improved in the federal police is that they called it the control test. So they will do polygraph, and they did another kind of test. They will do an analysis of the finances of the police officers and bosses and all of that. But guess what? He didn't take it after a long time because the counterpart didn't want it to make him feel uncomfortable. But also, there is another great story of how these control tests were used to get rid of people who were problematic and reinforce people who were part of the gang. So I know that for a long time, the US has been saying that these control tests are important, and I think they are, but this case helps to understand how a really corrupt system like this can also switch that and use it in their favor. So I will say, sadly, it's not unique. It's not just from Mexico. And that means a really great challenge for the US regarding how you approach to this situation in other countries today.
Can we get the... We'll let him, and I'll bring you the microphone. You go ahead. Ask your question. I will do it deliberately.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, keep it down here.
So much for your courage and your perseverance in this task of
Thank
taking the truth in this complex situation. I'm Esteban, I'm from Colombia. I'm a first year master here in the SFS. I have just a question about how we can transform this approach of the failed war on drugs. We learned from the final report on the Truth Commission in Colombia recently released that is so important to understand precisely that the narcotraffic money is not just corrupting like the peasants of communities that discriminate and make a lot of the problem, like the peasants are the problem, but corrupt the military forces, corrupt the politicians and all the people. What are your thoughts about this transformation? Because we, for example, in Colombia, we struggle with all the legislature from the United States Congress. And at the same time, we are looking for some hope. For example, when the Truth Commission interviewed Darío Usuga, he said, well, this person had a lot of truth, and indeed, it's important to contract not only the position of the criminals, but with all the sources available. What are your thoughts in this, the model of the transitional justice to receive these criminals, to change something more in the structural way? It's not poisoning the peasant, it's not stigmatizing the communities that produce the cocaine, in the case of Colombia. Well, thank you for...
Well, I want to start answering you with a story, quick story. The first time I went to the mountains of Sinaloa, my assignment in that moment was to tell the story of how the Sinaloa cartel was transporting the weed, the marijuana, by plane from the mountains to the border. So it's always hard to get access and to be there, and I was with a television crew to get permission to record all of that. But so we recorded, we stayed for the night in the community, and then because the next day I wanted to record it more. And the moment I remember more is the next day I was in the kitchen with a woman who was preparing the lonche, they will call there. So the lunch to go to, her kid was 18 years old in that moment, and I asked her, what are you doing for the lunch? And she said, tortillas with beans, with black beans. And I said, oh, okay, what's your kid working at? And he said, well, he's doing the heroin now, but in other moments of the year, he will do more marijuana. And the way that she responded to me was like, well, now he's doing coffee, and maybe then he will do lavender. I was so impressed. That was several years ago. Now I think I won't be that impressed. But at that moment, it was like the normalization of this illegal way to make your living in that place. The first thing I saw in that moment is that the people who does the public policies in Mexico City, sitting in a desk in the upper floor of a building in Mexico City, has no idea of the way that this woman is addressing the fact that his kid is performing a criminal activity based on the law. So how you pair those two narratives that are in the same country, and they don't touch each other, they don't talk each other, they don't communicate at all. They just think if you go to Sinaloa or you go to other places, we did another story about the submarines in the deep of Colombia. And that's the way they live. And they think that the state doesn't get the needs that they have, basically. So I think that the model of transitional justice will help to get into the complexities that the model of the war on drugs can get to, and this is part of the big criticism against the model, black-white model of the war on drugs, or even call it a war when you will have two sides. But what if one of those two sides are the same people that you are governing, basically? Are the people that that deserved opportunities that you are not giving to them? So at the same time, you know that they're engaged in criminal activities. In my case, let's say it's easier because my job is to tell their stories, so I'm not there to judge them, just to gain their trust, to tell the complexities of what they are doing. But I also understand that if you are a police the head of the police of a country, approaching to this, considering that you need results, is not easy. And if we go back to the Bicentennial framework, you will have, even reading the objectives, they have to have a more comprehensive approach to the justice, blah, blah, blah. And they said disrupt the production and dismantle the production basics, and to tackle more people and to arrest more people. So how, if you are a DEA officer, how you prove that you're working? How you prove, if you are the DEA and you are going before the Congress and you are trying to get $3 billion in budget, which is approximately what they have in budget per year, how do you show that you have been doing something to come back and say, I need more money? Basically, the whole system is based on how much drugs you have seized, how many people you have arrested, and how much laboratories you have disrupt, or how many, I will say, acres of marijuana you have burned. But if the whole system is based on numbers, and those numbers are this: arrested people, dismantle things, seized, money seized, etc., you really need quantity. Or you can just say that you will have quality, and the quality will say, I got El Chapo Guzman. But you have El Chapo Guzman, and then you lose the charismatic leader that will take the things under certain control, and then you have 5 or 6 people under him fighting for his power. And we have seen this over and over again. I don't think I have the easy solution, but what I think is the responsibility of our countries to first think about the transitional justice as a way to address the complexity, and this is the harder one, to negotiate with the US in a way that's also clear that we need to find new ways to show the work and to show results. But for now, we have in Mexico the president. I know that people laugh here about that. He said that we need more hugs and less bullets. But then if you see his yearly reports about his administration, he have the same things. We disrupt all those laboratories. We dismantle all of this. We seized all of these drugs. All these people are in jail, and we got all these drug lords. So it's basically the same. But the thing is that if you are on the other side, how you prove your results? So it's not easy.
I'd like to first thank you for those last comments that you made and for all of your work. Your obsession is something that informs all of us, and I think it's very important. My name is John Feely, and I was the charge d'affaires in Mexico City from 2009 to 2012. I spent my entire career in the Western Hemisphere in the Department of State, starting with the Bloque de Búsqueda as a junior officer who was a reporting officer in Colombia and finishing as the ambassador in Panama. I don't so much have a question as I have some observations. And I have a challenge for the young people in the room. The notion that there is a war on drugs, I'd like you to go and I'd like you to try to find the US government statement that says war on drugs. You'll go back to 1973, and by about 1990, that'll be gone. The Merida Initiative was a rule of law initiative. Of those $3.3 billion that were spent, I'll just give you a quick listing of some of the things we tried to do and some of the things we succeeded at doing with committed Mexican partners. The first police academy, the first doctrine based on FBI and American doctrine. The transition from an inquisitorial system of justice to an accusatorial system of justice. I won't go into it here, but it's like changing the justice DNA in your country. The reform of the prisons, instruction on human rights in absolutely every module of the SSP, that was the organization that Garcia Luna led. Training of detectives, training in terms of crime scene exploitation. You know how most Mexicans, historically, from the beginning of Mexico's modern era, interrogated prisoners? They tortured them until they got a confession. Sadly, that continues much today. The idea of preservation of evidence and that critical handoff of evidence from a detective to a prosecuting attorney. How many of the Americans here know Law and Order? That's the sort of thing we were trying to create under Merida. When it is called a war on drugs, it is fundamentally a mischaracterization. All that said, Merida failed. Merida failed for a number of reasons. And the most important thing that Peniley has just said to everybody here is that it failed because it's not black and white. And so it's really easy to caricature Garcia Luna. Although I would say it was only one Mustang and only one Harley Davidson. But he didn't act like that. I met with the man over 15, 20 times. He was the most dedicated, the most non-Mexican, and I say that with full respect. I spent 8 years of my career working in Mexico. But he was not a Mexican cop. He truly attempted to be a real cop. Now, he also was corrupt, and I accept that from the decision of the jury. We heard the rumors. My colleague, Roberta Jacobson, said very publicly when he was arrested in December 2019, of course we heard the rumors. We tried to run them to ground. For anybody who knows how intelligence works, when you work in a narco environment, when you work in a war zone, you can get anything written and anything reported to a source that you want. It's fundamentally among the easiest things, and it's a known tactic. It's called disinformation, which is why when you see an assessment that somebody like a Garcia Luna is corrupt or an allegation, you have to go and independently verify it. You may not believe it, but we tried repeatedly, and we couldn't. And the most important thing about this entire case is that one agency did know. They did have credible evidence. They had the testimony of El Grande. And they did not share that with me, with my boss, Carlos Pascual, with Roberta Jacobson, with Tony Wayne, with Tony Garza, with any number of other senior government executives. Peniley ran through the impressive list of cabinet officials that Garcia Luna met with. Do you really think they were all corrupt? Do you really think Hillary Clinton said, oh yeah, well, I know he's really corrupt, but I got to meet with him because it's too important? And that's the thing, and I hope your answer is no, because it should be. And that's the thing, the fundamental problem that I have with all of the narcoization of the drug problem in the United States. And again, it's a charge to the young people, and then I'll get off the soapbox. Stop watching Netflix. This stuff kills people. It doesn't kill you, but there's probably not an American here who doesn't have a close family member whose life was destroyed by drugs. But the United States, as a people, as a polity, not only has a fundamental problem in the way that we do drug cooperation, law enforcement cooperation, as you've just seen from Garcia Luna, we look for one big ticket prosecution. We look for dope on a dock. We should be about building rule of law. How do you fix that? Go talk to Congress. There are people across the US government, to include the DEA, who genuinely want this to happen. But it doesn't happen repeatedly because people need short-term metrics and politicians have to get elected. And the second thing I would say, in addition to stop watching Netflix and glorifying those who corroborate, is that the United States needs to look at home. How many people watched Breaking Bad? How many people watched Wendy and Marty Bird in Ozark? They're kind of cool anti-heroes. They're pretty bad people. They're just as bad as Garcia Luna. In fact, they're worse because they pass with an air of respectability that we allow to happen. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Thanks a lot for your work.
Thank you. You want to respond? I just want. Oh yeah. Thank you, John, for this. For me, this is news that you said that the DEA didn't share what El Grande. So just to give you a context, during the trial, El Grande, who was one of the key witnesses against Garcia Luna, said that when the Mexico arrested him in 2009, he told the DEA that Garcia Luna was corrupt. And it is news for all of us. I think this is breaking news that the DEA didn't share that with the Mexico embassy at that time. So thank you for that. I would love to interview you to talk more about it. But I just want to briefly respond so we can hear also John. And I think that I agree with you regarding the lack of coverage and information about how this works in the US. And even from the trial, so for example, one of the charges against Garcia Luna was that he was helping the drugs to come by the train. So the drugs came from Mexico City through the Texas border, and then they came up to New York. And you wonder, well, so how they managed, okay, I understand Garcia Luna helped the drugs went from Mexico City to Texas, but what about Texas to New York? And we have almost no information about that. And but well, I'm here now, so I can try to continue the looking for. And I agree the US need to look at home more, and that it also includes what we were mentioning, how you deal with the fact that it's really hard to confirm these rumors, even if you have good intentions to do it, and you have people saying things in different ways. Something that the former Mexican president Felipe Calderón had been saying is that you will have people coming and telling me that Garcia Luna was corrupt, and then you will have other people saying that he was great, and then you will have other people saying other things. So it is really a complex situation, but I think that doesn't prevent us from criticizing the fact that, okay, it is true that the Merida Initiative achieved all of these things, but it's also true that the new agreement has the same exact goals that the previous one have, and I think that speaks by himself. Okay.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts here. Completely agree. We have to start looking at this from both sides of the border. I think we've got to go way beyond the notion, not debate. Rule of law, of course. Both sides of the border, of course. But back to those people who have no way of life. How many Mexicans have no economy except to participate in this economy, and how many people, urban and rural in the United States, have faced dissolutions of life in which getting themselves caught up in the consumption of these commodities has become the defining aspect of their life, and thus, shall we say, the economic opportunity for mid-level entrepreneurship for a variety of people, from medical professionals to dealers across the United States. And if we hang back from the larger question of literally life chances and life opportunities, and only deal with it as a case of enforcement and law, we're dealing with, in a sense, I want to call surface characteristics. And until we start to talk about how can people live decently on both sides of the border, it is. So that's my big spiel. I want to add something else, and that is, I agree with much of what John Feely said, but the characteristic of historical Mexican justice is so far from reality, and I can sit here and easily say I have read word for word more Mexican court cases, criminal property and otherwise, over more centuries of time than probably any human alive today. So it was maybe the wrong place to overgeneralize. In fact, Mexico had an astonishingly effective judicial system for centuries. It started to corrode, but in fact reassembled in the 19th century. And yes, in the late 20th century, as other things corroded. So, but even then, that simply torture was the way to regular convictions, it happened. No question that it happened. But it was not normal. And in fact, you probably know this deal where they, when the panistas came in, they opened the judicial records hoping to embarrass the priistas, right? They opened the judicial police, et cetera, et cetera. And they have reclosed down for a variety of reasons. They're no longer as accessible as they once were. But several scholars I know who read them in detail, right, discovered that in fact, how will I put it, the nastiness was there, but often it was matched far more by limited competence. And so they weren't that good at doing the dastardly things they were at. And outside of the worst, there was an awful lot of evidence that standard judicial practice was sort of hanging in there. But what I really want to emphasize is the collapse of the economies as they're lived by everyday people on both sides of the border. And that is the substratum for the collapse of things like government without heavy corruption and justice without corruption. That those are the surface phenomena, and we need to be looking at the basis. And I'm going to take my opportunity, being in charge here and we're over time, to invite everybody to carry on the conversation over food and drink, talk personally, move forward. And thank you all, and thank Penny.